Kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. With the spring statement just 2 days away and the United Kingdom in a dire state of stagnation and managed decline, I'll be speaking to former UKIP and indeed former Conservative MP Douglas Carswell about his new manifesto for Britain. The Labour Party could be on the cusp of selling out on modern slavery in the pursuit of net zero and cosy relations with China. An NHS nurse who was sanctioned for calling a trans paedophile patient Mr. has spoken to GB News and will be discussing her legal action against the trust. Plus, one of the great legal scholars of our time, the man who stood alone against lockdown and now stands against the UK's membership of the ECHR, Lord Sumption, will join me live in the studio to discuss the Labour MPs pushing to solve the migrant crisis. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. As ever, let me know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, straight on to State of the Nation. No news now. Britain seems to be broken. This week, the Chancellor will announce her spring statement in which she will rearrange the deck chairs on her own personal Titanic. Bloomberg has estimated, along with the £5 billion saved from welfare and £2.5 billion from foreign aid, the Chancellor will try and make a further £10 billion in savings across various departments. But Annabel Denham at The Telegraph put it succinctly when last week she wrote, "This is now a country where 28 million private sector workers are expected to support 9 million who are economically inactive, 6 million public sector staff and 13 million state pensioners." In other words, every one single private sector worker supports someone outside the private sector with their taxes. Size of the state has ballooned. 5.5 million working-age people are on benefits. Debt is the size of GDP. Servicing the debt is our third highest cost. And growth is practically non-existent. So we need a radical plan to slash the size of the state, cut taxes, unleash growth and encourage investment. But the plan to save the United Kingdom goes well beyond restoring economic prosperity. We need to restore legal migration to pre-New Labour levels, aiming for a sensible net zero. The country has become addicted to it because of the way the ABR mistakenly believes it boosts economic growth. While it may increase GDP marginally, it has lowered GDP per capita. We need to restore common sense to our asylum policy, and this means repealing the European Human Rights Act, or the Human Rights Act under our own law, and leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. our rights come to the King in Parliament from the British people, not from unelected foreign courts. It also means restoring the judiciary to sense, returning the role of Lord Chancellor to oversee the judiciary, bringing back the law lords and abolishing the Supreme Court. Not only will this help ensure illegal migrants and criminals are deported, but it ought to end judicial activism and overreach. We need to repeal the Equality Act. It has perverted the ancient common law principle of equality before the law. It is to blame for the dangerous and wasteful rise of DEI ideology and employment in the public sector, as it happens, costing you millions of your tax pounds, harming businesses owing to its regulations on labour and reporting requirements. Only when we implement the project to restore the United Kingdom's constitution can we expect a return of prosperity to this nation. Did you know that in 2000, GDP per capita in the UK was only 10% below that of the US? It's now 40% below. That is the scale of our challenge. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But now I'm going to be joined by one man who has put together an immensely detailed plan to save Britain. He's the CEO of the Mississippi Centre for Public Policy, a former UKIP and indeed a former Conservative MP, Douglas Carswell. Douglas, what an absolute delight to be joined by you and to have read your piece in the Sunday Telegraph yesterday. Do you think constitutionally the British state can act as quickly as Donald Trump acted using the powers of the US presidency? And if so, how could it act quickly?
We've clearly got a different system in the UK to the one they have in America. But actually, there are things that could be done, and I think things that urgently need to be done. They're unconventional, but they're certainly there. In America, we all know that an incoming president can sign these executive orders, and we've seen Donald Trump do that. And because he's signed those executive orders, he's secured control of the border, dramatic reduction in the number of illegal migrants coming in. In the first month, he threw out of America about 50,000 illegal migrants, and he's revoked the visas of about 500,000 people from countries he deems to be culturally incompatible with living in America, and they're on their way out. We could see something done similarly in the UK. They're not executive orders, they're known as orders in council. And in the proposal that I put together, I come up with the idea that an incoming government needs to be prepared to deliver right away through orders in council. It's not, Jacob, simply because a lot of these issues require urgent action. It's because fundamentally winning a majority in Parliament is not enough. The civil service is against reform. The entire administrative state would do everything it can to stop making the changes Britain needs. And of course, the judiciary would be in the way trying to thwart any of these reforms. The way to address this is to use orders in council. And in my proposal, I actually draft a couple of orders in council. I actually have them as an appendix in the published version of the document. And what would happen is that when a Conservative or Reform party leader with a majority was invited by the King to form a government, they would say, of course, Your Majesty, conditional upon you signing these orders in council that would allow me to hire and fire civil servants at will, and that would allow me to begin to establish control over the borders. So yes, there are things that we need to do. They're unconventional, but the country's in such a pitiful condition, we need to take unconventional steps.
I agree with you, a lot needs to be done, but the civil service is also governed by an Act of Parliament from 2010, and orders in council can't overrule Acts of Parliament. So I wonder if actually you need to do this through having legislation, and you need to pass that quickly, rather than orders in council. Orders in council can only operate either under existing royal prerogative, which has mainly been eroded, or in relation to specific acts. They're not sort of standalone powers in the way executive orders
are. Of course, but under the Ministers of the Crown Act 1975, I believe it is, that allows you to make sweeping changes to the civil service through orders in council. You could, I think, amend the Civil Service Code.
But the 1975 Act, Douglas, is superseded by the 2010 Act. And you'll know, I mean, the law of implied repeal.
That allows...
Tony Blair, very interestingly, because I think your fundamental point is that the Blairites were very clever at getting hold of the state, and then we haven't done anything as Conservatives to remove it. But Blair, very interestingly, gave power to Alistair Campbell by order in council as one of his first acts.
If I could just
but one of the last acts of the Blair-Brown period was to take that power away by Act of Parliament. So I agree with what you're trying to do. I just think it's getting legislation through quickly that will be the only way to guarantee this, because orders of council also subject to judicial review.
Yeah, and if you read, as I'm sure you have, my fairly detailed 9,000-word proposal, there are a combination of emergency legislative steps and orders in council. But I think you need to do some of this through orders in council. I think much of the royal prerogative still applies to the civil service, the way the civil service is retained and managed. So I'm not suggesting you do this exclusively through executive orders in council, but part of what you need to do is to have those orders in council. I believe the legislation allows you to do this. It would certainly be unconventional, but I think if you're going to approach this as a conventional Tory, Jacob, I think you're going to end up doing what every conventional Tory government seems to have done since November 1990, which is to promise conservative policies but not deliver them. I think you need to resort to unconventional steps. Similarly, I'm sure you would be the first to tell me that the convention is that the House of Lords doesn't thwart incoming governments with their manifesto commitments. Again, I think we need to be prepared to do unconventional things. We need to be prepared to pack the House of Lords so that the House of Lords doesn't thwart us. We mustn't play by the Queensberry rules, Jacob. If we play by the Queensberry rules, we will have more disappointment.
I completely agree with you on ensuring that the House of Lords operates effectively. I think that's an obvious thing to do, that we need to make sure that it can't thwart the will of the elected House. You also have quite a programme of expenditure cuts. I wonder if you might like to highlight some of those, because I also agree with you that cutting expenditure, getting it back down to levels it was at not so long ago, is going to be fundamental if you wish to afford any tax cuts.
We currently spend about 45% of GDP. The government spends about 45% of GDP. Pre-COVID, it was 40%. When Tony Blair became Prime Minister, it was 36%. In order to reduce public spending, I think we should aim to get it back to the pre-COVID levels in the first term of an incoming administration. And I think the way to do that is to reduce public spending by 170 billion. Now, that is quite a tall order, and I detail in the proposal how you can do this. Now, some of this can be done by things that I'm sure most people on the right would agree with, eliminating most of the foreign aid budget. But sadly, it can't just be done by eliminating overseas aid. You can close down 8 of the 24 government departments, and I highlight specifically how you can do that. Again, using orders in council. It can, Jacob, be done by order in council. I detail how you could do that. That would reduce public spending by about 30 billion, but you're also going to have to tackle welfare. And I go into quite a lot of detail in the paper as to how you're going to have to trim PIP payments and other welfare payments. It will be painful for some people, but since when was living on welfare supposed to be comfortable? It's not meant to be comfortable. The country simply can't afford for large numbers of working people to go to work in order to pay ruinous rates of taxation to support people who aren't working. You're going to have to reform who receives benefits, and there will be some pain in that. It's not going to be easy, but the alternative is to become a sort of third world country where you have sky-high rates of taxation and borrowing, and eventually you trundle towards default. So I think the proposal is that you reduce public spending sensibly. That would allow you to have a measure of tax cuts as well. You need to, I think, learn the lessons of previous governments and make sure that your tax cuts are affordable. You don't want to stampede the bond market, for goodness sake. My proposal shows how you can cut public spending down to pre-COVID levels and afford tax cuts in the first year. And if you did that, I think you would begin to see the growth that we need and we haven't had for nearly 2 decades.
Brilliant. Douglas, thank you so much. I think it's inspirational what you're trying to do, and very grateful you joined me this evening.
Wonderful.
Well, with me now is my most intellectual panel, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Sir John Redwood, and former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. John, let me come to you first. This is what we need, isn't it? It's a radical agenda. How you implement it is a secondary issue, but things would need to be done quickly by a new right-wing government, not using the machinery of government that has existed in the post-Blair world.
Well, I agreed with your introduction, which set out exactly what we need to do. No, I think Douglas's plan couldn't conceivably work. I think it's extreme. It's scattergun and blunderbuss. There's a lot of very bad politics in it, which no government would ever put into their manifesto in order to get elected. And you rightly said the legal proposals don't add up. If you tried to remodel service contracts by civil servants through orders in council at the beginning of your tenure in government, you would spend the next 6 months rowing about that, and you'd be probably dragged through the courts.
And you would lose.
You've got to get on with people. I mean, look, Margaret Thatcher, with a bit of help from people like me, she made transformational decisions and got them implemented, which civil service didn't want to do. They didn't welcome all that, but we did it by working with them, not defenestrating them.
I did, when I was a minister, I looked into how Margaret Thatcher got things through Cabinet, and she worked very carefully through the existing power structures.
We used exactly, and what we also found worked was having far fewer people who were actually involved in the key decisions. So we didn't have all these extra hangers-on and advisors in Downing Street. When I was there were just 3 of us who did the serious advice and deputised for her and helped her. And then we knew exactly what her mind was. We could have personal arguments with her in private, and nobody knew what the disagreements were all about.
Lloyd, basically Blair set up the system that has worked very well and has maintained sort of soft left government ever since, and that any new government of the right needs to take back the levers of power.
Well, I think it's fascinating that you think that the last 14 years was a soft left government.
Well, the first 5 years was coalition, after all.
Wow.
And then we had Theresa May.
I don't think it was soft left under Boris, and I don't think it was soft left under
7 weeks
Liz.
of Liz, no.
And I think that the problem with what Douglas outlines is it is so extreme that it would end up causing the kind of catastrophe that you saw with Liz. You need to be much more clever about it. I think Labour needs to be much more clever about what it's doing as well. But I think the idea that you want to revoke a load of these laws that have now been embedded so much in the political psyche that won't actually change the day-to-day lives of ordinary people means you lose the will of the people in this country. And what people want to see is their lives improving quickly in the early stages of whatever government comes in, and then they are happy to swallow the pain later on. It's not like the old days where people come in with a big majority and people really like them. Now they're in with big majorities because they just didn't like the other lot.
And there's one thing I think we can all agree on that's in Douglas's article, where he says the Lord Chancellor should be given the power to fire judges. If I remember my history rightly, James II tried this and it didn't end up very well, that the judges cannot be fired by politicians, can they? That would be a fundamental attack on how we're governed.
I think it's completely... I think it's completely wrong, because what you will have is this Americanised politicisation of judges, and what will happen is...
But even Donald Trump can't fire judges.
No, he can appoint directly, and even join his party people, and we have always avoided that. Now, the idea that judges at the highest level should also spend some of their time deliberating about what new laws are coming forward. The idea that maybe you say to judges, even when you're sitting in the Supreme Court, you can sit also as lords actually legislating. I don't have problems with some of those kinds of changes, but that's not abolishing the Supreme Court. That's just about saying, actually, rather than waiting until you retire, you can come earlier into the Lords.
I would certainly put the Supreme Court back into the House of Lords, because I think the construct of the King in Parliament being where all our government is a very good one. But I agree with Lloyd that the judges would have a contribution to make in the House of Lords, as historically they did.
No, I agree with that. I think the Lord Chancellor was a unique British institution, and Labour and Conservative Lord Chancellors fully understood the role, and they knew when they were an independent judge leading the judges and when they were a cabinet minister expressing a more political view. I think they handled it extremely well. It was a lot cheaper, it was a lot neater, and it reflected the realities of power without corrupting the justice system. But they did have a role in appointing the judges, and again, I see nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with them appointing. I'm just reluctant to have them have the ability to fire judges.
And what we need to get better at, those who are running governments that don't like the results in the courts, is instructing the courts much more clearly in straightforward legislation.
Better legislation.
Better legislation. We have created this huge mammoth set of legislation with King Henry powers, where ministers can, with a pen, basically change the law. And of course, if you're going to give ministers that, you're going to see more activist judges, because you have defenestrated Parliament, and so of course someone fills that gap. What we should return to is having much better legislation, much more arguments and discussions in the House, much better sets of committees, strengthening our committees in the US and in other places. Select committees also do the legislation because they are the experts in that area, and they can actually hold the government to account, rather than a noddy committee, which you have at the moment, which basically had a load of people nodding along while the minister talks.
And what you've got to do is act promptly as a minister when the courts do disagree. I mean, we've got a case at the moment where the Sentencing Council has come up with advice that the Justice Secretary can't live with, but she's got to legislate to stop it. It's no good just tutting about it.
But to be fair, she has been very clear, very early on, that it was unacceptable, that the last Conservative government shouldn't have accepted it when it was in draft, and that she has pushed back. And very often in the British Constitution...
But she hasn't changed it.
Very often in the British Constitution, you don't need to legislate for these things. People get the message, and it changes at the next...
wrote her a very rude letter, didn't like the interference at all.
And who appoints the chair of the committee?
Well, the President is the Lord Chief Justice, and it comes under her. The government has the power of appointment.
And so what you will see is at the next appointment round...
What, you think he's going to be sent to govern New South Wales, whatever the modern equivalent is?
People will be appointed who have the right attitude,
all right.
and that sets train.
Well,
we look forward to that.
Most intellectual panel. Has the Labour Party become an apologist for modern slavery in the pursuit of net zero and cosy relations with China? Find out shortly. Thank you both.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Anna, let's have a look at this, and how do we tackle the work of one of Britain's most infamous white supremacists?
Yes.
William Shakespeare.
Oh no. That William Shakespeare, yes.
Why is he being? Why are some people saying he's a white supremacist?
So this seems to mostly be based on some research that was carried out in 2022 by some academics that concluded that essentially promoting Shakespeare, as they said, benefits the ideology of white European supremacy, because the argument is that effectively you're saying that this kind of culture is superior to others. But, you know, I'm afraid most people who read Shakespeare will conclude that it is superior to most things that are written. And that's nothing to do with him being white. That's just to do with him being a genius. And it's very depressing seeing this, but also the amount of time, effort and presumably funding is spent on these sort of projects. It actually, I think, does a disservice to the youth, to young people, because by effectively erasing or trying to rewrite history, they then don't actually learn about the struggles people have gone through. So it's a bizarre one.
But I find it astonishing, because this is Birmingham University that's done this study, or an academic from Birmingham University. Birmingham should be celebrating everything great about the Midlands. It should be biased. If Birmingham and Stratford itself cannot celebrate what makes Stratford and Birmingham great, because celebrating a successful British writer from centuries ago reduces the visibility of writers from other countries that had nothing to do with us in the first place.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This spring, the Chancellor steps up to the dispatch box to make a statement. But what kind of statement will it be?
Taxes, spending, growth, benefits, cost of living. What's changing? And more importantly, how does it affect you?
Does she have the headroom to make headway?
Will it ease the squeeze or tighten the grip?
Will businesses boom or struggle to survive?
And does the spring statement have real impact, or is it just political posturing?
GB News brings you the analysis that matters. Just what it means for your money, your home, your future.
The Spring Statement 2025, Wednesday on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were discussing a plan for reforming Britain, and the mailmogs have come in droves. Richard says, good evening, Jacob. What's interesting is watching you and Douglas argue about acts. This is central to our problem. Between you all, you've legislated us into paralysis and using treaties and so-called international law as belt and braces. We don't care how you do it. When you promise action, just do it and stop playing Parliament. It makes elections pointless. Charles says, Jacob, this all happened under 14 years of Conservative government with an 80-seat majority from 2019. Why did the Tories do nothing about the size of the state and the tax burden? And Phil says, hi, Sir Jacob, the problem is the political class do not have the will or the appetite to stop illegal boats or reduce migration, have to scrap the ABR, here, I agree with that completely, and take the power away from these lefty lawyers. Our Parliament is not fit for the 21st century. The country is swamped by the public sector and private sector by left-leaning ideology. Well, I think that's all very fair. And a GB News viewer says, Jacob, the law also needs to change to hold political parties who are elected accountable to their manifesto. If they don't follow what they've stated when elected, they are booted out and another election triggered. You know, who would judge that? Anyway, is the Labour Party on the brink of sacrificing modern slavery protections in the pursuit of net zero and sucking up to the Chinese Communist government? Well, the government's infamous nationalised energy company that doesn't generate any energy, GB Energy, was set to have measures that would prevent it from spending public money, that's your taxpayer money, with companies that used forced labour. But the government, the Labour government, is whipping MPs to vote against the amendments owing to concerns from the Foreign Office, of course, about relations with China. In other words, we all know the Chinese solar panels are often made using forced Uyghur labour, but apparently for this Labour government, this is not a concern. Well, my most intellectual panel is with me, Sir John Redwood and Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, it must make you proud to be a socialist, to be backing a government that wants to use slave labour.
No, they do not want to use slave labour, and there are already a raft of laws that prevent that and require companies to root it out. What is not helpful is when you have this kind of gold plating of laws. So you already have a law about modern slavery, you already have a law about forced labour, and then in every other law you also include a double clause around those laws, and all that does is create a chilling effect for businesses and for anyone that wants to invest, because they say, well, not only can I follow these sensible provisions, but I have to also follow a separate set of provisions about investigating what my supply chain is. There's already a duty to, when you know that supply chains are difficult, and to make sure that you work towards cleaning up those supply chains. That's the level it should be.
Work towards cleaning them up?
Rather than an absolute, if you have any sniff of problem, you can't invest at all.
You say working towards cleaning them up. I mean, there's an awful lot of evidence that there is a genocide going on against the Uyghurs, and that the Chinese government is behaving appallingly, and that components are made by forced labour in China. And so you're happy with that? You're not going to say...
No, it's appalling what is happening in China, and it's appalling what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims, just like any form of forced labour is appalling all around the world. But what you can't have is the idea that because there is a particular problem in a certain area of China, all Chinese products are treated as if they are persona non grata in this country. That is not the reality of how private individuals operate. You and I will all have Chinese goods in our homes and houses, and we don't have a general boycott. This government doesn't have a general boycott policy, and so therefore once you gold plate these laws, the danger is that what you're doing is through the back door having a general boycott policy because you make it impossible to do business. Should it be routed out?
Sounds as if you do want them to be able to buy things that may be slave labour, but surely I thought the idea was that all these wonderful green jobs were going to be in Britain and give people these new opportunities, because you're sacking everybody in the fossil fuel-related industries and and sacking a lot of people out of industry with high energy costs. And now we learn that you want to import it all from China. I don't want public money used to import a whole load of solar panels from China. Why can't you find a way of getting some production into the UK so that we can actually be proud of the way the solar panels are made, and we're paying the wages to British people instead of the Chinese?
We need to do exactly that. You're totally right. But just like if you're building a new oil rig, some components will be from China and other parts of the world.
Yeah, but this isn't the components, it's the whole thing, the whole solar panel.
No, the installation of the solar panel, the connectors, the inverters, they may all be British-made.
But
the solar panel itself, at the moment, is competitive only via China, and we need to build that up.
Because our energy prices are so high, isn't it? Because we can't afford to, whilst China's making these solar panels, pumping out as much carbon dioxide as it feels like.
Energy prices, and in fact New Zealand's energy prices are so high, is because us in New Zealand chose a free market approach to how we priced our electricity pegged to gas prices, rather than actually having
it's through the roof renewable costs. It's not gas prices. Gas is pretty cheap
rather than having a proper system where cheap electricity was sold at cost at the market, or you had a domestic market. At the moment, we have no domestic market for oil or gas.
If we had fracking, we might get one there, as we used to have. We're just not using our natural resources, and we're making gas be backup rather than running it efficiently full-time. We've closed all our coal stations, whereas China's using coal, so we're getting...
China's the biggest developer of wind power in the world.
But its coal use was 4.9 billion tonnes last year.
Yes, of course. It's a huge country. But in Britain, what we need to do is get to a stage where we are self-sufficient, and we do not sell our energy abroad first. We sell it first.
Actually, if I switch from gas heating to electric heating, my bill would be 3 or 4 times as big. So the electricity is dear, not the gas.
That's because the energy companies are making making a steal from you, effectively. British Gas will, in the North Sea, pump up the gas. They will sell it on the international market, and they will sell it at the international price.
But the gas is cheaper than the electricity.
They will sell it at the international price.
The electricity is dear because you've got all those wind farms that only work part of the time. Then you have to have on standby a whole load of other plants.
No, they will sell it back at the international price to their own producers or connected producers. Then they will produce the electricity, and then they will put a markup.
Cheap. As John's saying, it's the electricity that's expensive. Yeah. This is because of wind and all the renewables that push the price up.
The wind and renewables, their core price is low, but we have pegged those prices to inflated gas prices.
Core price isn't there. The core price is very high when you're taking into account the capital costs.
Anyway, guaranteed high prices to get them to put the wind farms in.
The cheapest form of energy is onshore wind, which the Tories banned for so many years, and so we are so behind.
Not including the capital costs and the standby costs. Anyway, thank you to my most intellectual panel. In a moment, GB News has spoken to the nurse who is taking legal action against her trust when she called a paedophile a man, which he was. Plus, Lord Sumption is waiting in the wings to discuss why it's time to leave the ECHR.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello, here's your latest winter sun forecast brought to you by the Met Office. We'll see some warm sunshine across parts of the Mediterranean over the next few days, but plenty of showers too. And certainly on Tuesday, a mixture of sunshine and showers across the Canaries, across Madeira. Fewer showers across Spain and Portugal, so some sunshine here. But notice across the central part of the Med, plenty of showers, some heavy, even thundery showers around. And brighter skies the further southeast you go across Turkey and Cyprus. Over the next few days, showers mainly in the east, brighter skies the further west you go.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The royal family is an enduring symbol of tradition, unity and pride for Britain. At GB News, we celebrate what makes this country great. In our new royal newsletter series, you can join me, Cameron Walker, for Inside the Palace, an exclusive look every week that takes you beyond the gates and brings you the very latest from those at the heart of the monarchy. Never miss a royal moment again. Sign up now. Go to gbnews.com/royal newsletter and get the latest straight to your inbox.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christys Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christys Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. An NHS nurse who works at St Helier Hospital in Surrey was punished for referring to a 6-foot-tall convicted paedophile and trans patient as Mr. The patient from a high-security men's prison racially abused the nurse, Jennifer Melley, several times, but it was Miss Melley who was disciplined by the hospital in October 2024 with a referral to the Nursing and Midwifery Council. She is now filing a legal claim supported by Christian Legal Centre. Well, my most intellectual panel is still here, the Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood and former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, it does seem unfair, doesn't it, that somebody who is racially abused is accused of misbehaviour when she has referred somebody who's come from a men's prison and was born a man as Mr.
This does seem silly. It seems incredibly silly. I don't think anyone should be punished for using the wrong pronouns. If I called you a she or her...
I'd be a bit surprised.
You might be surprised, but it shouldn't be a punishable
I wouldn't be that offended.
offence.
I think
Now, of course, if I did it deliberately to keep upsetting you and winding you up, and maybe if you are a slightly dangerous prisoner and I'm deliberately prodding you until you then, of course, there are some practical considerations there, just like if I were to pick on anything and deliberately tease and prod. But that's not my understanding of what she did here. My understanding is there were a number of occasions where she either inadvertently or, kind of out of routine, called this person by the wrong gender. To me, we should live in a society where it doesn't matter. And to some extent, Susie Eddie Izzard, who, of course, has adopted she, her pronouns, gets it right, where they say, call me whatever you like, as long as it's not rude. Call me he or she. It doesn't matter as long as you're being civil to me. That is the kind of approach that we should be encouraging people, rather than you've said the wrong thing, you should lose your job.
It's just an odd way for a public body to behave. And this political correctness that seems to have seeped into the NHS, that somebody doing something that is actually perfectly natural. And after all, this man had come from a men's prison. He is deemed by the state to be male. And she called him Mr. And it must be very unpleasant for her, because we report on these cases and she'll probably win in the end. But actually, that's months and months of mental pressure, of upset, of
And what
going to
law
bed
will
every
she
night.
win on? What law will she win on?
I knew you were going to say this, so I'll let you say it.
She will win her case, most probably, on the Equality Act, because the Equality Act will protect her, and that's why we need it. This overreach of DEI, which sometimes does go wrong, will be corrected by a law that is right and proper, and if you got rid of it, actually, she wouldn't have a case to stand on.
Well, is that right? If we didn't have the equality law, there wouldn't be an issue. You call people what they like, and there wouldn't be any law to go to as a protected characteristic.
She wouldn't have the protection of her beliefs.
No, equally, there
and
wouldn't be a
rights.
protected characteristic.
He's not going to the law. This
No,
is,
no, but
this
the
is,
disciplinary
No, the
people
disciplinary is all about good practice. That's nothing about the law. That's all about their view of what is decent practice as a practitioner.
Interpretation of the law.
No, this is their interpretation of what it is to be equality and diversity. It's not their interpretation of the law. If it was their interpretation of the law, a barrister would tell them they were wrong.
It's the public sector equality duty, which is enforced upon them.
No, I agree. But I think it's a terribly sad case, and it's just very bad staff management, isn't it? And if they really do think she did something wrong, they should have cleared it up pretty quickly and say, why don't you say sorry to him, or would you just please promise you don't do it again? We don't want to lose valuable nurses over something like this. Now, we don't know all the facts of the case, but part of the explanation I read was that she'd actually been on a call to a medical colleague and had been overheard by the patient. And she was saying, I needed to get across to my medical colleague that he was physically a male.
Right, yes, yes.
And that is even more important because this is becoming a problem, apparently, that if you just accept the pronouns that the patient recommends, it could then muddle up what kind of investigation or treatment the person needs if they've got the opposite body.
And for screenings and all sorts of things, it actually is a risk for the patient.
You could have a health problem because it was misapplied, yes.
We've got into a muddle. I support very much trans rights. I support the idea that people can transition through proper process. But we have got into a muddle that we have treated sex and gender as the same thing. And so we've kind of said, you can change your gender. Well, I think you can because gender is a social construct. And we've then said, in law, that means you've changed your sex. And therefore, we've changed lots of records going back, medical records in the past. We should just have two identifiers on the medical record. What is your biological sex and what do you want to be called? And the ability to have those two shouldn't be beyond wit or man to do that, or wit or woman to do that. But at the moment, we have
But if I recall
done both
correctly,
together.
this was a judgment of the European Court of Human Rights saying that people had the right to change their birth certificate if they had a sex change.
Exactly. Yes.
As it all goes back to this concept of human rights. And what's the government supposed to do if it's signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights? You can change your sex on your birth certificate. So what are you going to do? You're going to have two sort of listings. One, your birth certificate sex, which would be your passport, and then your medical record sex. Or do we just have to do what you say and say that your birth sex is, for all administrative purposes, your sex?
There are some very small cases where your birth sex is incorrectly recorded, and so there needs to be a very small process to allow people to change their actual birth sex. But what we need to do is just say there are two categories. There is gender and there is sex. There is biological sex and gender. Biological sex is attributed by X, Y, and Z. Gender has a much wider, broad set of characteristics. And yes, you can change your legal gender, which is what matters in most parts of your day-to-day life. It's how you present. But for some medical things, for some very biological things, for maybe even what prison you go into, what matters actually is your physicality. And so therefore, some sports, we will be able to revert to that. That would seem to be much better rather than trying to conflate two things that are not the same.
All right, well, we've got a statement from the Epsom and St Helier University Hospitals NHS Trust, which said, these matters are still subject to ongoing, banned word, internal proceedings, so it wouldn't be right for us to comment further. That's a very unhelpful statement, and the word ongoing is a ghastly jargon word. Continuing should be used instead. That's the grammar lesson for the day. Anyway, thanks to my panel. In a moment, I will be speaking to the former Supreme Court Judge, Jonathan Lord Sumption, about why it's time to leave the European Court of Human Rights.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Heading into tomorrow, more cloud across central and southern parts with some spots of rain. Brighter in the north, though, with some warm, sunny spells. A different story tonight, though. Cloudier across the north with outbreaks of rain spilling in as a result of these frontal systems moving through this evening and overnight. Most of the rain largely light, but we could see some heavier spells across exposed coasts and northern areas. Eventually, this cloud and rain sinking southeastwards, moving into northern parts of Wales, northern parts of England too, and quite blustery for a time, particularly across Scotland. Across the south and southeast, staying dry with clearer skies and lighter winds, so it's likely we'll see some mist and fog by the morning, and it will be a slightly chillier start here too. Across Scotland to start the day into tomorrow, most of the rain will have cleared away, perhaps just leaving a remnants of cloud, and can't rule out the odd shower just skirting across the Northern Isles, and still rather blustery here too. Quite a murky start across Northern Ireland, grey skies and some quite low cloud, and fairly similar across northern parts of England and Wales too, perhaps even seeing some spots of rain and drizzle. Across the south and southeast, a brighter start once any mist and fog clears, but through the course of the morning we'll continue to see this band of cloud and rain sink its way southwards, so any brighter skies soon being replaced by cloud, but any rain largely petering away. Turning brighter across Scotland, Northern Ireland, seeing some sunny spells here, rather dry but still the odd shower just skirting the Northern Isles, and with lighter winds it should feel rather pleasant in the sunshine with highs of around 14 to 15 Celsius, but even where we see that cloud linger across the south, still rather mild for the time of year. Into tomorrow with clearer skies, likely more mist and fog to start the day, perhaps some patchy frost. But through the course of the day, as a ridge of high pressure builds, there's going to be plenty of sunny spells, particularly across central and southern parts. But we'll soon see a change once again into the northwest with more cloud and outbreaks of rain here. And it's likely the majority of us will see more rain as we head towards Friday, quite windy at times, and temperatures returning more towards average.
Join me, Nana Akua, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Well, nearly every day a case emerges from the courts whereby an asylum seeker has avoided deportation because of the European Court of Human Rights, and today is no different. The report today has detailed a case of an Iraqi man avoiding deportation because of his ECHR Article 8 right to a family life. Even some Labour MPs are now getting fed up with this, with a number of them calling on the Prime Minister to curb ECHR powers as a means of restoring common sense to our asylum system. But would such a move work, or do we simply need to leave the convention? Well, I can think of no man better than Jonathan Lord Sumption to answer that very question. Jonathan, first of all, thank you very much for coming in. One of the things you've said that I think is fundamental about the European Court is you've got to decide how democracy functions and whether it functions through its own systems or whether it has these supranational ones on top. How do you think a democracy best functions?
Well, I think the essential point is that a democracy needs to have a government responsible to an elected body which is answerable ultimately to the electorate. I am not against the notion that one should be bound by treaties, but I think that the proper function of treaties is to deal with things that can only be dealt with internationally. And I know you will disagree with this, but a good example of a treaty that could only be dealt with internationally is the European treaties, which conferred on the United Kingdom, in my view, very considerable benefits, which were not obtainable domestically. The ECHR is completely different. It's a treaty which is entirely concerned with the domestic law of the United Kingdom. There is absolutely nothing in the ECHR
that we can't do domestically if we want to. The object of the ECHR is to ensure that we do some things that we don't want to do or may not want to do. The problem about it is not the text. I have no problem with the text. Most of these rights existed in English law for many years. The problem is really the Strasbourg Court. The Strasbourg Court has emancipated itself from the text of the Convention, which is the only thing that the states party to the Convention ever agreed. That has produced two quite serious problems. One is that it's not consistent with the rule of law, because the basic principle of the rule of law is you've got to be able to ascertain in advance what the law is so that you can be guided by it. If you have a court like the Strasbourg Court, which makes it up as it goes along, then you can't be guided by it. This seems to me to be a fairly fundamental problem. The other is that it confers what is essentially a legislative power on a court. I don't object to the fact that it's a foreign court, but I wouldn't wish to have any court vested with a legislative power, given that judges are quite rightly not responsible to any electorate.
And therefore you have the question of how do you change the law, who votes to change the law, if the judges come to decisions that are patently absurd.
The Convention is not amendable by any decision of any organ of the United Kingdom.
Or any vote. So how would you then protect human rights in the United Kingdom? Because you say that the text is unobjectionable and that most of those rights we enjoyed already, but we enjoyed them without a Human Rights Act. We enjoyed them with a Bill of Rights that was amendable in the same way as any other Act of Parliament. What was it about the British Constitutional Settlement prior to direct appeal to the European Court that protected the rights which almost every politician thinks ought to be preserved?
Well, nothing, of course, protected those rights against Parliament, which is legislatively supreme. And that's the objection that most believers in human rights have. They wish to tie the hands of Parliament. Now, under the British Constitutional Settlement, you can't tie the hands of Parliament because no Parliament can bind its successor. But you can certainly increase the political cost of doing certain things. And that is effectively what is advanced as the justification for the Human Rights Act. I think it's a weak justification.
And do you think it's practical to go back to the situation where the protection of Parliament and the political cost was sufficient? As it happened to do, because I think the alternative is that you pass what purports to be a Human Rights Act or a British Bill of Rights, which turns out to be just as amendable as any other Act of Parliament.
Yes. Well, I think that the public resistance to amending a Human Rights Act in a really material sense would probably be very great, whereas I don't think that the public resistance to the intervention of the Strasbourg Court would be that great, because it is essentially a rogue court.
And it has gone rogue, in your view, recently, or was it rogue in the way it was set up?
It's gone rogue gradually. It wasn't set up that way. It only started business in 1959, and it became very actively legislative in the course, really, of the 1970s, and that has progressively increased as time went on.
And the living document doctrine?
The living instrument doctrine, yes. This is essentially the way, you look at the way that it works in practice, it essentially asserts a right in the court to extrapolate from the text of the Convention by a process of analogy, to say what would the draftsman of the Convention want now. And they fit this more or less artificially into one or other of the categories created by the existing text, but it's intellectually a very unconvincing process. What I would like to see is the text of the Convention reenacted as an ordinary statute with the British courts, which are wholly independent and of very high quality, adjudicating on them. I think it would be necessary to have transitional provisions dealing with the basis on which that was to be interpreted, so as to avoid getting into the same problem as we've done with the Strasbourg Court. And I think that we would then end up with a perfectly respectable system of human rights protection. We don't need an international court to supervise us. Canada has a very fine record of human rights protection without an international court. New Zealand, ditto.
And you don't think that this would make much difference to migration cases, however, do you?
No, I don't.
That's a side issue as far as
I think it's very unfortunate that the whole debate over the ECHR has really got hijacked by the immigration issue. There are lots of reasons why we cannot easily deport people, the most important one being that it's often very difficult to find a place that is willing to accept them, which is safe. And I don't think that anybody is suggesting that people should deliberately be sent to places where they will be unsafe. The daily toll of cases on immigration are usually, first of all, people very rarely actually read the judgments in full. Often, the things that are criticised in them are actually very minor parts of the reasoning. We've had cases...
chicken nuggets and so
well,
on. Yeah.
Chicken nuggets not being acceptable for the man's children, or in one case it was suggested a pet cat was a problem. I mean, these are ridiculously selective accounts of what are often very complicated decisions. I think one has to remember that most immigration appeals are actually rejected. Something between 3/4 and 4/5 of them fail. Moreover, the ones that are pointed out as being a bit eccentric, like the ones I've just mentioned, tend to get overruled on appeal to the upper tribunal. This is a problem about some wayward English judicial decisions, not a problem about the Strasbourg court. And it's worth remembering that the immigration tribunals handle about 50,000 cases a year, and we're talking here about a minuscule proportion of those cases.
All right, so pull out of the ECHR, but don't assume that will solve migration.
It won't.
Lord Sumption, thank you very much indeed. Up next, it's Patrick Christys. Well, Patrick, I'm going to say to you this evening, follow that.
Well, quite indeed, but I certainly intend to, Jacob. So Labour are going to put asylum seekers in brand new homes in rural England. So we're going to be analysing that. I've also got a case-by-case basis of all of Labour's lies and sleaze in the past week. That's ahead of their spring statement, of course, on Wednesday. Eritreans have been fighting each other on the streets of Britain again. Are we now a dumping ground for the world's problems? Beverly Turner joins us on facial recognition cameras, and Elon Musk's dad on the burning of Teslas by far-left activists.
Well, that's all going to be very exciting. As always, that's coming up with the weather. I'm back tomorrow. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset tomorrow is going to be absolutely fantastic. Except you're not ready to go to the weather. They'll get to the weather in a moment. You'll soon be there. It'll be lovely in Somerset. Don't worry. Fear not. In spite of this momentary pause in broadcasting. Patrick...
There's just 2 weeks left to see how you could be a spring winner, as we have an incredible £17,777 in tax-free cash to be won. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also give you the latest Mulberry handbag and not one, but 2 sought-after designer watches. Make sure you don't miss out, as lines close on the 4th of April. For another chance to win the lot, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB12 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 4th of April. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.